President Cyril Ramaphosa has met the deadline to respond to questions from an independent panel that's probing the robbery at his Phala Phala farm. In fact, the panel has been appointed to determine whether there's enough evidence to institute impeachment proceedings against the president. So, it's alleged that thieves made off with about $4 million from Ramaphosa's farm back in 2020. That farm's in Limpopo, of course. Let's get you a sense of the impact that these submissions could have on the way forward. For that, we're joined by former SCOPA chair, Themba Godi. Also taking a look at this is Professor Dirk Kotze, who's a political analyst. To both our guests, lovely to have you on the program. Thank you so much indeed for making time. Themba Godi, if I can begin with you. I mean, to what extent do you reckon it's important that we even know what the panel asked the president? And as you answer that question, perhaps let us in on what you reckon are some of the more pressing questions you still have, given what we know.
Well, look, it's interesting that the president has met the deadline first time. If you remember what happened with the public protector as well as the Reserve Bank.
Yeah.
The panel is supposed to make a determination on whether there is a case for the president to answer or not. So it is in his interest to submit, and I think that's why he met the deadline without any qualms. As you would have noted, that it was the parties in Parliament who made the first submission, that is making a case for the creation of the Section 194 committee. And it was then for the President to put his side of the story, to rebut or to clarify some of the issues raised. So he is essentially responding to what might have been alleged against him and clarifying his position. Yes, indeed, it will be interesting to know what it is that he has said, which I suppose should not be different to what he has submitted to the public protector as well as the Reserve Bank, because on that will lie the determination by the panel whether or not he has a case to answer, which has huge political implications if they were to find that he has a case to answer.
Yeah, and we'll unpack those with Professor Dirk Kotze in a moment. But Prof, let me get your first take on where we are. I mean, a golden thread that's been running since the saga was made public is this principle of transparency. And at each moment, questions have been raised about whether or not what the president is submitting to these different institutions, including Parliament, should be made public.
Yes, I think this is an important point, but in the very next stage, it will become public. This is the only phase of the whole process which is the least public of all the processes. As we can see now with the public protector's process, it's broadcast on a daily basis. So in that sense, it's very much in the public domain, right to the end when the final decision will be taken by the National Assembly. So this step is exceptionally important because it depends on this whether the point of departure is that there is a very strong case against President Ramaphosa, or that the parties, and especially ATM that brought it to the Parliament, that they must now present their case to the other members of Parliament. And I think here it is also an initial investigation. It's not really an investigation. It's rather going through the documents that have been presented to the panel, and on the basis of that they can determine whether there's a prima facie case against President Ramaphosa or not. So it's not an investigation already. It's not that they can take their own initiative in order to gain additional information, except that has now come from President Ramaphosa also.
Yeah.
But the next step, and that is when they report to the Speaker, and when the National Assembly must elect or vote on it, I think that is the first very decisive moment for this process.
Yeah. You know, Themba Godi speaks of a political fallout potentially that might come from this. And some people are saying, in fact, no matter what this panel decides, there's going to be quite the reaction from the political landscape. Gwede Mantashe on the campaign trail at the weekend in Gauteng, speaking about the president, Prof, being in some kind of being attacked from within the organization, so to speak, saying there's a concerted effort to discredit him. A lot of work is going to have to be put in throughout this process to ensure that all the political machinations, the political mudslinging, doesn't necessarily impact on the integrity of, the process itself.
Yeah, if I may come in,
Sure.
I think that the concerns raised by Mr. Mantashe are, as far as I'm concerned, misdirected, because it is in the nature of political mudslinging that every available opportunity is utilized to press home one's advantage. And I think in this particular instance, it is the president who is actually making it more difficult for himself by being very reluctant to open up. We have heard reports that he was reluctant to meet with the integrity committee of his own party. He has missed deadlines by the public protector. He has missed deadlines by the Reserve Bank. So there is a sense in which he's reluctant to speak and somehow assumes that it should be nobody's business. We must just focus on the work at hand. It doesn't work that way. I think that both inside his party and also outside his party, he has allowed this thing to move in a particular direction, more especially when you also regard the fact that he came in on the basis ticket of being ethical, of being transparent, and willing to engage. Yet when the opportunity has come, whether it's about the CR17 back statements, whether it is the leaked audio tape of the ANC-NEC meeting, or this particular instance, he has come across as very reluctant to open up. And therefore, it will be childish to expect that his political opponents will not use that to press their advantage home, which they themselves have used on numerous occasions against their own political opponents. So I think he has a responsibility, and in fact it is in his own interest to see the process swiftly resolved so that he can focus, as he claims, on the job at hand. But dragging it out with delays that he has done, I think has not worked to his advantage.
In other words, it's all love and fair in war. Prof, do you agree with that sentiment, by the way? This political strategy taken by the president to keep his cards close to his chest and not really say much, at least not anything substantial, given just how much time this issue has been, debated in the public?
Yes, I to a large extent agree with it. I think there might be some considerations from his side. I think one of it is the fact that he has burnt his fingers in Parliament when he provided incorrect information in a question-answer session with John Steenhuisen about the CR17 matter. So I think President Ramaphosa now is very, very cautious about not saying anything which might ultimately come back to him as a liability. And that is why, for example, what he is now responding to this panel and what he responded to the public protector and other investigations like the Reserve Bank also, that they are all exactly the same. Because if it's not, then it becomes a question about contempt of Parliament and of court. And all these matters are, by their very nature, legal in terms of their status. So it's not just a statement that's been made. But then at the same time, I think when it comes to the other part of your question, the fact that he insists that the processes must be followed is, I think he believes that that is working in his favor. That if he opens up, it becomes a political debate, it becomes a form of mudslinging over which he will lose the control. At the moment with this procedural approach, he has more control over the process, especially because he's the president. And that whether we are a state of the rule of law and whether there is all senses of saying, well, everyone is equal before the law, a president is a very important person in any country. And therefore, the evidence against him will have to be overwhelmingly strong. before it will be presented as him having had a case to answer.
Sure. This potentially, Themba Godi, might... do you want to chime in there?
Yeah,
sure.
I want to say that, I find that very interesting that, just having come out of the Zuma era where nothing needed to be proven, to be flown around, it's very interesting that insofar as it relates to President Ramaphosa, the PR machinery and the media outlook and the analyst outlook, it's a very cautious and fact-based, kind of approach. I would imagine that as a leader, you don't want things to distract you. And if you know the facts will always remain the same, whether you delay providing them or you provide them, urgently. I can tell you that, look, if you see the former President Mbeki lambasting him, if you see Mutlante lambasting him, it does him no political favors. It is not in his interest to drag the process, because ultimately his standing, especially as a leader of his party, does not depend on a legal process. It depends on a political process. So if the consideration is purely legal and does not take into account the political damage that it does to his standing, then it is deficient as far as I'm concerned.
I want to just hone in on what you've just said around the analysis and the media coverage around the story. I don't suppose what you're suggesting is that it's a bad thing for this to be fact-based, at least until there's anything substantive that's been found by these processes. I appreciate perhaps the inconsistency that you're pointing out between how this president is being treated versus his predecessor, but what exactly is the critique?
Well, look, there are two things here. One, it is the legal process. The second one is the political process. I would imagine that if I was in his position and having come in as a man who is open, who wants transparency, any question that arises that taints my integrity, I would want that sorted out as urgently as possible. Because if I know the facts don't change because of time.
Yeah.
The facts remain the facts. What you know and what has happened will remain the same. So what you need to do is to dispel these things, get them out of your hand, unless if he's not sure, he's not sure what Arthur Fraser knows and what else he can bring out. So he's hedging his bets, to try and see how can I manage this. But if you know the facts remain the same. And I really am dumbfounded how he allows this to drag out and seem to be now, working against him. But let me be surprised by him coming up with something quite substantive. I get a sense he's been caught with his proverbial pants down.
Sure. Well, to use a cliche, only time will tell. Gentlemen, thanks for your time and for helping us connect with us, at least from your vantage point. Really do appreciate it. Themba Godi is the former SCOPA chairperson in Parliament. Also joining us there is Professor Dirk Kotze, political analyst. Well, we know that after this, eventually, ultimately, it might lead to some kind of vote from the National Assembly, and that too will have a lot of points to talk about, at least insofar as Parliament's track record around these type of issues. It's a story we're obviously watching quite closely.